of all the different ethnic groups in the US, Latinos are the ones that most believe in the American dream. I can't tell you how many times I heard the following thing. Teacher, that's really nice, that's really great, but that's not for people like us. I want to create this movement where we make it okay to explore our own purposes and live them, to give others the opportunity and the vehicles to do it, because I believe that that is what brings us peace and fulfillment.
Before we jump into this episode, I'd love to invite you to be a part of the community where you can listen to more content to help you be a smarter, stronger, and better equipped, successful leader. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button. I would love and appreciate your support. It's amazing to me to watch the community grow and read all of your comments each and every week. I can't wait to go on the journey with you. Thank you so much, and it means the world to me. Pack Driven Leader Podcast. This is your host, Tyler Dickerhoff. I am excited today. I have another bald and beautiful man, Dr. Paul Rivera. Paul is a catalyst for positive change. He has a multifaceted career all over kind of a lot of different avenues, academia, diplomacy, international economics, strategic coaching, and he's a co-founder of an organization called Be Act Change with his wife, Esther. His mission is to ignite profound growth and alignment within individuals and organizations globally. He's actually joining us today from Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. His transformative work has mobilized nearly $1 billion US. We're also going to hear about a figure 3.2 trillion, which blew me away, and leaving a lasting imprint on communities worldwide. A seasoned globetrotter, as I mentioned. He's a first-generation American and a proud Latino. Paul, thank you so much for joining us. Man, I'm excited to have this conversation.
It is absolutely my honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So one element that I learned about you and kind of this being a first-generation American, you went through a lot of struggles, as you share in the book that your wife wrote. She talked about that as you share in your different elements. Explain to us what the broken promises of the American dream is for so many in the Latino community, and how that shaped your journey and your work thus far. I acknowledged all of your work. How did you get there, and how did that broken promise of the American dream lead you to that place?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that question. So the American dream it's an amazing thing. It's an ideal. It's one that, having traveled all over the world, turns out it's just sort of the name for what people in different parts of the world give to this idea of going to another place, to finding this land of equal opportunity, right? And so the American dream really is that. It's this ideal that in a land of equal opportunity, that all you need is your hard work in order to achieve, and this is what the definition is, in order to achieve your highest aspirations. And that's really, really key. Everybody comes in assuming that opportunity is equal. All I need is hard work, and that combination will get me to my highest aspirations, right? And that is what it should be, right? That's what it should be, But you grow up.
But there's a but, right? There's a but.
There's a but. There's always a but, and it's a big but, But growing up as a first-gen American, didn't speak English at home. I didn't actually learn English until I went to school. All of these things.
How old were you when you immigrated?
So I was born in the U.S. I was born in Los Angeles. Yeah, I was born in Los Angeles.
But
my mom is from Mexico.
Immigrated shortly before that.
So my parents actually met in L.A. Okay. My mom is from Mexico. My dad's from El Salvador. And my mom's father, so my grandfather on my mom's side, and my dad's older brother, my uncle, worked in the same factory. So in LA. And so that's how sort of those two sides of the family came together. So my parents met in LA. I was born in LA, but Los Angeles it's the kind of place where you can live an entire life and never really speak a word of English. Much like my wife grew up in Miami, same thing, right? You can, Miami, English is secondary, in a lot of these places. So you grow up in a very entrenched Latino culture and community and all of that. It's fascinating because so many millions have come looking for that dream, only to find that there is not really any such thing as equality of opportunity, right? Immediately you're behind the eight ball a little bit whether it's systemic racism, whether it's I don't have the money to really invest to put forward into myself and my family, and that's going to affect my intergenerational wealth. It's going to affect how my family receives healthcare, education, all of these things, right? But what I've always found fascinating, there are so many statistics out there that of all of the different ethnic groups in the US, Latinos are the ones that most support, that most believe in the American dream. Okay. Even though it's something that from the objective measures, and here's where the American dream for me goes wrong. We've translated this idea of equality and highest aspirations into sort of fixed measurements. Right? How do I know if I'm achieving the American dream? Have I made a certain income? Have you bought a house by a certain age? Have you gotten married? Have you had kids? And so we've translated the ideal of the American dream into these socially accepted check marks.
As you're sharing this, I'm thinking like, all right, give me a story. Either your family, you talk about, the what you've seen, or where you work, where you've really seen this like major gap. I'm right now, to give you kind of an element, I'm reading Nelson Mandela's A Long Walk to Freedom. And the part where I'm at right now is I'm blown away because I didn't know this, is how during the mid 50s, it was a major difference in what opportunity was because of education and how they totally changed the education system. So I'd love to know, kind of in this American dream, the Latino community, is there something specific like that where it's education, or what's a story that your family experienced, whether you're, your uncle, your mom working through the factory system, something that really made this is a major chasm to get across?
There's thousands of stories, I mean, just the ones that I'm familiar with, So I have an uncle. He's deceased a few years ago. I had an uncle who in El Salvador was a lawyer. He was a judge, extremely successful person. But like so many people who come to this country, they leave their countries because there is turmoil of some kind, right? And so El Salvador was a place that experienced a really protracted civil war. Given the position that he was in, he experienced a lot of death threats against himself, against his family, and things like that. So, they sort of picked up and came here. My wife's family did much the same. They're from Nicaragua. During the early 80s, there was the whole Sandinista revolution happening and all of these things, and they found it prudent to, for the safety of their family, come somewhere else. And so my uncle came, and he was a very prominent person in where he was from. He spoke English. He extremely well educated. But you come to the U.S. and it's not open arms. You know what I mean? He's not. You can't just pick up where you left off and all of these things. So at the time, the best thing that he could find working was that he was a valet at the Cheesecake Factory. It's an exceedingly humbling kind of experience, when, he was somebody who was used to working with the Supreme Court and doing all of these things. And I remember he used to tell the story of guests would come, they would ball up their keys and they would literally, fling them at his face, and he'd have to catch them and say, "Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir." And be very deferential and all of these things, And so it's one of those things that I've lived overseas now for well over a decade, and I talk to so many people in these countries that want to come to the United States because they think that it's a magical land where, there's literally money growing on trees and there's a job waiting for you as soon as you get here. And that experience, that letdown of the American dream in so many ways is something that causes tremendous emotional damage to a lot of these folks. The statistic is that there are, just among Latinos in the United States, 4 million Latinos every year experience severe episodes of depression. So not just like I'm feeling bad or I'm having a bad day, but to the point where they're pretty much non-functional. And when they are asked, what's the root of this? Where's this coming from? So many of their answers come from basically, I'm not achieving the check marks of the American dream, right?
So it's not that fulfillment that they're seeking. They're just not. So I guess you share the story of your uncle there, and I think about this prominent judge. All of a sudden, is it the time frame? I'm guessing this was, during maybe the 60s, 70s. I'm just assuming maybe it's a different time frame, but I'm wondering, is that still happening today in 2024?
So this was actually during the 80s. I was a
Okay,
kid.
80s. Okay, yeah.
And so I actually had to share a room with him, which was really, really funny because, I was, in my early teens, and here I was with this guy who was probably at the time about my age then now. So he was like around 50 at the time, probably. And, a smoker and just a lot of personality. So I learned a lot from my uncle, but
Maybe
it was definitely,
those stories aren't like, I'd love to know some of those stories, right?
he was a great, great guy.
So is that still happening today? That seeming oppression, you talk about depression, but it's like, are we still seeing that, or was that, almost 40 years ago?
I've been on a speaking circuit with the promotion of our book and all of that for the last year or so. And as part of that, I've spoken at a whole bunch of universities, We've been all over the US, speaking at universities, talking to young people, and talking to a lot of Black and brown immigrant type kids who I really missed. I was a professor in a past life. So it was so nice for me to be back on college campuses, and it was really heartbreaking, really heartbreaking in a lot of ways. It was beautiful to be able to come and inspire them and for them to see somebody who looks like them, who's gone a different path and has been successful in my own definition of success, But it was heartbreaking to see that all the things that I struggled with, all of the things that I felt like I had to overcome as a kid are still 100% relevant to them. So they still feel all of those pressures. They still feel all of the barriers that I felt like I had to overcome, and it's heartbreaking to see because, I'm older than many of their parents at this point. Over a generation has gone by, and really there hasn't been that much of what I would call genuine progress on a lot of these things.
Share maybe an example of a story from one of those students that, the audience can relate to, maybe something you went through that they go through that, instead of just this, painted picture of, yeah, like give me an example.
Okay. So when I first became a professor, actually, I was a professor at a state college in California State University, Channel Islands. For those of you who might be from the area, I was one of the founding faculty members there, and we were the first major university in the county, major public university in the county, and it's a very heavily Latino-dominated population. A lot of migrant farm workers and that sort of thing.
Camarillo, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah. And so a lot of migrant farm worker kids, and so a lot of first gen college, first gen in the U.S. kind of thing, right? So very similar experience to what I lived, And so part of that was going out and doing outreach to a lot of the local communities to try to bring the kids in, and it was something that I was always passionate about. So I was always the first one there, and it was nice that I could go and speak to the parents in Spanish, and it was something that they could relate to and all of that. And the parents were always really impressed, but I can't tell you how many times I heard the following thing. Teacher, that's really nice. That's really great. But that's not for people like us. So that this whole idea of, bring your kids to the college, encourage them to apply, to come, support them while they're there. I had so many students who dropped out, frankly, within a certain amount of time because they could afford either the tuition or their books, but they couldn't afford both. So there's a lot of kids that's the decisions they're having to make, And so I would talk to these parents, and I remember I would say to them, what do you mean when you say people like us? Do you mean people who work their butts off every day? Because that sounds like those people deserve something good. Do you mean people who dropped everything that they knew? Sorry, I get I get a little teary-eyed talking about these things, people who dropped everything that they knew.
You've lived.
Yeah. People who dropped everything that they knew to come to a strange place where they didn't speak the language to do everything they can to start over. Are those the people who don't, that's not for you either, So, and I had so many of the same things come up as I'm talking to these kids over the last several months. For example, I went to a big Latino conference in New Orleans a few months ago, and so many of the kids had to basically either beg for permission to come from their parents. They're in college, but they have to beg their parents for permission to come. They had to lie to their parents about where they were going. They had to do so many things. Like there's just that barrier at home to understand that, you know what, you can have a dream that's bigger. You can have an aspiration that goes beyond the confines of what you think is appropriate for Latinos or appropriate for immigrants or appropriate for our family, and that was my personal experience as well. I was the first one in my family to go to college. I have this innate like wanderlust. Like since I was a kid, I wanted to see the world. Like I wanted to see the whole world. And at this age, I can say that I've definitely done that, but it took so much internal fortitude on my part to be able to go beyond what was happening in my surroundings. My mom to this day says that the only reason that she leaves her house is to suffer. So, traveling was not big for my mom,
Okay, yeah.
So, you know what I mean?
Is that because she feels safe at home?
I think so. That's how she describes it.
I get it. Yeah.
She feels safe in her surrounding. And I mean, and everybody has a backstory, everybody has something. When she was little, my grandparents moved 100 times in Mexico before they finally immigrated, so for her, that stability and that place that's home and safe and all of that is really important to her. But I grew up in that feeling so confined.
Yeah.
I don't know if I hope that your listeners are familiar, but like my childhood hero was Jacques Cousteau.
Okay.
Like, do you remember?
Yeah.
Do you know?
Of course.
Like,
yeah.
Right. So
Jacques Cousteau, as in the submarine and just the stories of, right.
So he's the inventor of modern scuba, right?
Yeah.
And so he had on in the late 70s, early 80s, he had a TV show that was called The Underwater World of Jacques Cousteau, and it was on every week, and I watched it religiously, not so much because I wanted the underwater, the science of it, but I loved one that he got in his boat and he went all over the world. Like he saw the whole world. He was everywhere. He was super confident in himself. Like, stuff goes wrong. They were inventing stuff as they were going, and just the way that he dealt with adversity, or when he would go on shore and he would talk to people. And I love that he was always amazed. Like he had his eyes open and was open to the amazement that would come to him, and I love that. But he was also weirdly masculine in a way that I was completely unfamiliar with. So I come from this.
Hold on. I wanna really spotlight this.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a couple things that tie in here. There's this, and again, I'm going to kind of paraphrase, frame up. We talk about this Jacques Cousteau who gets to travel. And I'm guessing there's this like restriction within the community, that the Latino community is like, oh, we don't press that. We don't go there because we've told we shouldn't. And then there's also this ideology of what to what you're getting at, what a masculine individual looks like, what they do, how they do it. In many ways, it's a very manual in labor as opposed to, more knowledge-based or ideological. So those are the things that are hitting my mind right now as you're sharing based upon the experiences, what you had, but also this Jacques Cousteau character and what he displayed. And so I'm guessing it's just this massive clash of, what's right? What is normal? What should I actually aspire to? Am I setting the stage for kind of what was going on?
I would say so. I mean, and the Latino community is huge, right? There's all kinds of experiences. For example, my wife's family, her dad has a PhD in Latin American history, and her mom has an MBA, and so they very much valued education and that sort of thing. But at the same time, there was still a lot of that very traditional thinking in different aspects.
Whether it was traditional to the Central American countries, or like your uncle who came here and said, "Hey, you're an accomplished, litigator, lawyer. You do all those things, but hey, you're only good to be a valet here. That's all you can do."
Right.
And so it starts to create, I would imagine, as a teenage boy to say, oh, where is this? So I'd love you to keep, going here.
It's fascinating because there, as you said, there's identity pieces, and then there's insecurity pieces. As you're growing up, you feel you desperately want to belong, right? You want to belong. This is my family. This is my community. These are my people, and you want to belong. So I feel like I did a lot of things to try to accommodate myself into that sphere.
Yeah.
I was taught a lot of you don't make waves, be a good team player. And it took me a long time to see myself as a leader, a long time to see myself as somebody who had sort of not only leadership qualities but intellectual qualities and creative qualities that I could bring to something, and so a lot of that upbringing was really about keeping us focused in the zone that we were told was our zone.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it, right? There's the insecurities that go on top of it, because there's something like we talk so much about, there's that little voice inside you, and no matter what situation you're in, and no matter how many pressures you have around you, that little voice is there, and that voice is nagging you. And my little voice was telling me, you want to see the world because you believe in this sort of commonality of humanity, which is even stronger now in me. You are meant for more than this. You're meant for more, and that's something that people, and I think a lot of Latinos, a lot of high achievers, a lot of people who have reached a certain level in their lives really struggle with, right? Like this idea of you should just be grateful for what you've got. You've achieved the check marks of the American dream and you should be grateful. But that doesn't silence the little voice inside you that says you are meant for more. I've made it through my career. I have a PhD in economics. I speak 6 languages. I've been around the world. I was a tenured professor. I was a US diplomat, and I've achieved some really, really cool things. But at no point did that little voice inside me really silence itself until I left all of that. I left my tenured position at the university. I left my tenured diplomatic position, and I struck out on my own. We're creating this business that we have because this is where I feel that my core is. This is where I feel that I'm making the impact that matters to me. This is where I feel my purpose shining through. And it's some of the first time in my life where I feel that peace that comes with aligning what you do every day with what you feel inside and what is the gift that you have to give to this world. And so it's been such a long journey from that kid who struggled against the confines that were placed on him to the person that you see now.
You talk about the confines, and I think about, hey, Paul, you're just supposed to operate in this box. And for so long you did in your career. And then ultimately you had the opportunity to get outside of that. And that's when you started to feel like, oh, this is who I'm meant to be. And we talk about, what leads to that struggle and that distress. And, you bring up masculinity and how that's affected. So I'd love to know more kind of, the traditional Latino, does it affect it? Or is it all like this societal that's brought on, hey, this is what you're supposed to be?
I will tell you that, as we started our business, as we wrote our book, as we've sort of reached out into the world, we've gone into it with the assumption that this was really something that was directed at Latino, Black, Brown, immigrant communities. And it's absolutely true. But I will tell you that I have been incredibly gratified, shocked, and saddened at the same time by the fact that it's connected with so many people who we didn't think would be our audience, that we didn't think that this message would resonate with. So while I talk a lot to those groups, that the message is something that it's clear that so many other people feel. I've met, frankly, older white women who have come to us and said, man, that was me. I grew up, and there's a lot of commonalities that we don't see, but they'll be like, I grew up in rural Iowa in the 50s. And it was the same. I had these expectations placed upon me. The people around us were all family people, factory men, kind of a thing. And we all knew that this was the box that we were supposed to be in. This is the direction we were supposed to go. And, so many people have said, I had to leave my environment. I had to go someplace else because I couldn't be who I authentically am within those confines, and I had to move. So it's a message that our book tour has been a global tour, which has been amazing. So we've resonated so much with people in Australia, in Japan, in the UK, who feel those same feelings. We also thought, strangely, that the experience that we were describing was one that was unique to immigrant, say, Latinos in the United States. But we've had so much pressure to actually translate our work into Spanish because, as I said, I spend a lot of time outside the US, and so many of the folks that we talk to outside of the US who are Spanish-only speakers want to read the book because that message also resonates with them. Those pressures are still there. Even though they don't have the immigrant thing, that family pressure, the societal pressure to fit into a box, to sort of silence your authenticity is always on top of people. So, it's, as I said, it's been sad to see, but also gratifying from our perspective to see that our message is one that really has a broader audience than we thought.
There's a lot of universality, as you're saying. Yeah. And so then it really begs of me is like, okay, is part of the lack that this is a real issue across all platforms? Does it actually lead to more of the problem itself? So this idea we don't understand that is a real problem leads to there's more distress, there's more struggle because it just continues to perpetuate.
I mean, change is hard. Change is hard. We've worked a lot in change management, whether it's from the individual, from the corporate, from the organizational side, and change requires you to change your fundamental paradigm in a lot of ways. What you understand is good and bad, what's right and wrong, and that oftentimes is at individuals' cores, and so that process of starting to disentangle all of these things because those core assumptions that we have take us through our emotions and take us through our thoughts and take us into our actions, So starting to unmask so many of these things that we've put on just to get through our days, to not have to be too vulnerable. And that's a big piece of it. People fear the vulnerability, the judgment that comes with doing and saying things that are outside of the expected norm, And just to bring it down to practical, one of the things that we talk about a lot is think about the conversations that happen at Thanksgiving or at Christmas, kind of a thing, and there's so many memes and romantic comedies and all kinds of things that come around how people dread the holidays. But why do people dread the holidays? Because you're going to get the question of, have you gotten married yet? You still in that job? When are you having kids, right? And a lot of these sort of American
common narratives
type thing, those common narratives, what would it be like? Imagine what it would be like if, you sit down for Christmas dinner and your aunt, your grandmother, somebody turns to you and says, hey, I've never asked you before. What is your highest aspiration? Mm-hmm. Tell me what it is. What do you see? Like, what do you see as like your biggest thing? What's the impact that you want to have in the world? And how can I help you? It'd be such a different conversation, and we talk about change and talk about how the universality of it. I think it has to start at the individual. As an economist, I'm a microeconomist, so I believe that everything starts at the level of the individual. And if we want to create that change socially, we have to start doing it one at a time. It's one of the reasons I'm here, talking about these things. I think it's really important for people who grew up like me, who had a similar experience, who have, a little more melanin than others and things like that, to start hearing people like me talking about these things, because you have to make it okay. You have to start normalizing a different kind of conversation.
So we talk about the universality. I'd love to kind of dig a little bit deeper in the specific Latino community. And what are, you talk about the holidays, those common narratives, but I'd like to know a little bit more about this, this American experience, this American dream, but yet from a Latino perspective, And, what are those common narratives that need to be changed and challenged to allow more people to end up to create their pathway like you have?
I think there's a couple things.
Yeah.
So one of them is actually slightly different than your question, but I'm going to go there
That's
anyway.
all right. You're driving the ship. I'm just, trying to, direct the rudder a little bit. You're Jacques. I'm just, someone along for the ride, looking through the little, hole, the periscope.
You hit home on that one.
Yeah.
Thank you. So one of the things that's fascinating is that Latinos in Latin America often don't think of themselves as Latinos. It's not an identifier that they necessarily use, right? Because they're Mexican, they're Dominican, they're Salvadoran, Nicaraguan, right? And so it's oftentimes not until they come into the melting pot where they're sort of lumped together as Latinos, and that's a shock for a lot of people. It's the sort of thing where suddenly, like, oh, I'm Latino. It turns out I'm Latino. Before living in the Dominican Republic, we lived in Jamaica, and Jamaica is an amazing country. I love Jamaica, but it's so fascinating because Jamaicans identify themselves as Jamaican first.
Okay.
So you can ask a Jamaican, "Are you white? Are you black?" They say, "I'm Jamaican," right? And so I've talked to so many who came to the US often just for holiday or moved or whatever, only to come to the striking realization that it turns out, oh my gosh, they're black, and it's not something that they ever understood, right? So your personal identity, your home identity is oftentimes different from the identity that you have or that is placed upon you in the United States, right? So at least from the Latino perspective, one of the things that's hard is that the unification of the Latino community is a really, really tough thing because it's the sort of thing where you have to get past the fact that you grew up, as a Salvadoran, hearing jokes about Hondurans and Costa Ricans and all of that, because you have to come together in the United States and help each other out. And, you have to be each other's allies, which doesn't happen enough. So I think that's one big piece, right? That from the Latino, from a community type perspective, there's not enough of what I would say is integration, mutual help, and that sort of thing. And I say that because in my own career and in my experience, I know my wife says the same, and several other people like us say the same. The biggest cheerleaders that we've had, the people who have really moved us along in our careers, have been our African American mentors. And that's been really striking for us. It's enough that it is a trend. There's actually a very prominent Latina leader named Nelly Galan. She's written books. She was former president of Univision, like really, really prominent Latina. And she says the same. In her career, the people who picked up the phone for her and vouched for her and moved her along were African Americans, not other Latinos, And so that's one piece, right? That there's an interesting community that needs to gel a little bit more to really sort of advance each other. The other side of it, though, is one that Latin America, even though it's changing a lot over the last few decades, there's a heavy, heavy, heavy religious Catholic sort of culture. Even people who aren't Catholic are still impacted by the Catholic culture piece that goes with it. I told you, I'm in the Dominican Republic. The DR has a Bible on its flag. And so that integration of values with sort of social and cultural norms is something that's really heavily imposed in some places more than others, but it's definitely sort of a pan-Latino kind of experience. So if you think about any kinds of behaviors that are considered acceptable or not acceptable, or how it is that you justify imposing certain behaviors on your children, on your family members, that lens is one that you can't ignore. So that piece is really important, and that comes with us to the United States when we come, and so that piece
I think that has to create more confusion, which ultimately is that some of the issue when it comes to mental health challenges. Where like, I am no longer what I thought I was. Now I have to be something else. But there's this challenge like, is that really who I am? The mental health that we're so aware of. You talk about depression. Is it because now you're thrown into a pot? You no longer have that identity you held on to. And so we have these deeper, conditions, right?
there's multiple levels to all of these things. One of them is, as we mentioned, that there's the struggle to reach what you're told is the dream, and if you're not reaching it, it affects you. It affects your emotions. It affects your well-being. And that's part of it. Then there's the clash between what you're told is this is the land of opportunity, do whatever you want, just work hard. And then the clash between that and you're told, but this is your lane, this is where you need to be. And this is, that piece is hugely, you kind of can't ignore the weight of that, because there's a belonging, there's a fundamental identity piece that goes with that, and it's such a struggle that we see, and I think a big piece of starting to disentangle that for people is really tapping into their purpose. And especially for a lot of these Latino communities, Latino individuals and immigrant, and pretty much everyone that comes to us, it's disentangling the idea that seeking your purpose and living out your purpose is individualistic, but individualistic in the way that it means that this is how I am best suited, best poised to help my community, and it's starting to refine that message a little bit, because so much of the traditional American dream is about my wealth and my success, and I'm in competition against you, and what you get is something that I don't get, and sort of this, and so really starting to teach people that their purpose is the gift. Their purpose is the value that they bring to the world, right? This is how I solve problems. This is what people seek me for. This is the value that I want to bring. And that by nourishing that, by letting that flourish, that is actually the best way for you to help your family, your community of Latinos, your country, which however you define your country, but your people. So it's an interesting road.
I think if we've touched on different things here and we talk about how do we impact the progress, and then also what's the barrier there, and we talk about overthinking, we talk about fears, we talk about these regrets and the mental health issues. As you guys went on your tour and you talked about these things, what is really impacting the progress? Is it the condition itself, or is it the help to identify and support?
I would say that it's more the latter, that it's hard to find a supportive network, and it's one of the things that we're taught, so you have to remember that Latin America is known, and this is one thing that Latin America shares with a couple of notable exceptions, but pretty much all of Latin America is about political corruption. You can look at Chile, you look at Argentina, Mexico, Nicaragua, anywhere, it's all about political corruption, which means that it's a culture of low trust.
Sure.
Low trust,
low
right?
leadership trust, especially.
Low leadership trust, but in general, low trust. And so my favorite story is that my father-in-law has a letter that his father wrote to him as he was being shipped off to go to boarding school. So my father-in-law was a young man, like a teenager, and was being sent off to boarding school. And his father wrote him a letter with all kinds of advice, about all sorts of things, about, watching what you eat and all of these things, really practical things. But at the end, the letter said, trust in nothing, not even your shadow. So and it's interesting because we've always thought of my father-in-law as somebody who's kind of paranoid, kind of anxious, and kind of tense, and you're like, oh man, well now I see why. This was the messaging. It was ingrained in him from the beginning, and we see a lot of that too, and so as you translate so many of those things, move forward a generation, move a different country, but you bring that mentality with you, when my wife was in college and she wanted to go off and do these, scientific study tours and all of these things, there was a hesitation there, from the family's perspective of, well, that sounds dangerous, that sounds risky, or when when we both were leaving the diplomatic service. As U.S. diplomats, we had a nice status. I had a different color passport, and I had a house that the U.S. government paid for, and the government paid for my kids' private school and all of these things. But we felt suffocated. There's also a price that you pay for having all of that and for having that status and the amenities that come with it. But when we said we were going to leave, they thought we were crazy. You're leaving. You are literally handed the dream, and you're giving it back. You're ungrateful. Your kids are going to starve. You're going to suffer, and so many of these things. And forget the fact that we left the US and moved back to the United
over
States,
you.
right?
This manipulative
Yes.
hold over you that again becomes very societal. It comes back to, as we talked about earlier, the inferences of, oh, this is the box that you should operate in. And you're like, wait a second. I don't want that. And when you throw the trust, and we've seen that in other communities, that, the Native American communities, the indigenous population, they struggle with it. You go to other countries, and it's this usurping of power and control that just totally creates the condition where your, father-in-law's father wrote, trust in no one, not even your shadow. It's pretty awing.
It is, and it's fascinating to start to deconstruct it a little bit, and I love knowing those kinds of stories because it gives so much context to what we sort of intuitively understand is happening. But just to see it like that, it's so in your face. You can't ignore that. That's the messaging that's coming, and that stays with them. That's one of their core values at this point, and that translates to how it is that they impact their children and the next generation.
So, to take a leadership perspective in it and kind of a solution to this is, as a leader, as an influencer, how do you aim to represent and address these challenges, in the work and the public life? And how are you working to say, here are the problems, let's fix them?
So as I said, I function on two levels. One is very much at the level of the individual. And I'm a microeconomist. I believe that you are your own engine. You're the source of your power, and that's what you have to sort of nurture first. So for me, so much of starting to change this is one person at a time, and sort of initiating that ripple effect. It's been really fascinating because there have been so many people that have come to us, frankly, hopeless, but hopeless in such a weird way. Hopeless in the sense of these are people who have doctorates, who have JDs, who by any stretch of the imagination are successful. They've made it. They're respected. And they can't shake that core unfulfillment that they have, the dissatisfaction they have,
Like your uncle.
So yeah, and he was sort of forced into it, but even CEOs of major corporations here, ambassadors, I have, because of my background, I actually have an interesting line to several ambassadors who intimate a lot of these things. They're sort of at the top. They report to the president of the United States. That's their boss. And yet they feel this dissatisfaction that there's a lack of authenticity in there, and there's a confinement, and they feel that it's too late, that there's nothing I can do. This is my path. This is the path I've chosen. So much of that comes from fear that their true self would have led them down a completely different path. And so a lot of folks are afraid to find their purpose because they think that what they're doing now is completely off the rails, or that it would completely mess up their lives. The truth is though, that I have never found that to be the case, because your core is who you are, and try as you might, it leaks out. It still leaks out. You know what I mean? And so pretty much everyone that we've worked with, it's been about finding those tweaks that show them how better to integrate their purpose, how better to align their actions to what they understand to be their core. And it's not necessarily a major revolution. And at the same time, a lot of it is massaging people's regrets and reframing their regrets. And this was something that I had to go through. So I was, among the many jobs I've had, I was an EMT at one point.
Wow. Okay.
And I thought that I wanted to become a doctor. And so for so long, I thought I wanted to be a doctor. I used to tell my wife all the time that, man, like we even contemplated at one point me like dropping my jobs and going back to med school and, going a completely different route. And then we start chewing on it. Like, why did I want to be a doctor? If you talk to folks, some of them want to be a doctor because they love the science or they love the money or something like that. But my thing has always been about positively impacting lives. I wanted to become a doctor. I loved my EMT job because my whole thing is about positively impacting lives, and we start talking about it and you're like, well, you know what? I've done a lot of that in my life. I've actually aligned to my purpose a lot and I haven't had to do that by becoming a doctor.
Yeah.
And so many of our clients, it's the same thing, right? It's getting to what are those core values? Why? What is it that makes you feel good? What is it that you do? And bringing that out and showing them, look, you've done this. This is why people seek you, So that's a huge part of it.
Is that your like main hope to bring that? And this is kind of the last question. Is that the main hope to bring to others that maybe went through the similar experience, you and your parents and your uncle and family members, your wife's family, that say, hey, the Latino experience doesn't have to be in this box, that really there could be something more. Is that your real hope?
100%. I mean, that's why we're out here. We're sort of passing this message on that not only is that the goal. I mean, how do I say? For me, this is about initiating a movement. I want to create this movement where we make it okay to explore our own purposes and live them, to give others the opportunity and the vehicles to do it, because I believe that is what brings us peace and fulfillment and joy. And when that starts happening one at a time, that's when society changes. In my world, I work a lot in diplomacy and international relations and that sort of thing. You watch what's happening in Israel and Gaza, and you watch what's happening in so many other parts of the world where there is strife. I work a lot in Haiti, where there's gang warfare happening, and half the country is food insecure. And it's so easy to actually make that connection between the really toxic and negative conditions that you see now, working back to seeing situations where if people had been allowed to live differently, if people had been allowed to make different choices that aligned with them better, that so much could change, not to mention depression and drug addiction and gang violence and all of these things, So for me, it's about the individual, but it's about initiating a social movement, really.
So Paul, as we wrap up here, I'd love for you to share how people can, discover more about you, how they can maybe come hear you present, speak. I'd love for you to be able to share that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So we have a website. Our company is called Be Act Change, and it's we live what we are. It's be yourself, act to be yourself, and then change the world. So that's Be Act Change. So we're at beactchange.com. We have a pretty lively Instagram, which is be.act.change. You can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn is probably the best way. I'm Dr. Paul Rivera on LinkedIn. So we do lots of speaking anywhere, globally, Spanish, English, French, Portuguese.
All the languages.
So all the languages. So but that's where you reach us, and don't be shy. We talk a lot about part of community is having champions, and a lot of folks don't. So one of the things we like most about our sort of socials community is that we feel like we've created a community of champions for those who don't feel like they have that. So, if you feel like you're one of those folks, I encourage you to check it out.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. And thank you for all those viewers, listeners, whether you're listening or you're viewing on YouTube. Remember to hit subscribe on YouTube to help more people find out about impactful leaders like Paul. If you could rate, review this wherever you listen to it, I appreciate it. Until next time, remember, we're just one step in growth to becoming an impactful leader. And it's conversations like we've had today with Paul that help each one of us grow. Thank you for being here. Till next time, have a good one.